Again, we greet you and welcome you this morning. We are in the middle of a series titled, We Are For Our Neighbors. And Claire, before you go, this is Claire Knipscher, who started off our service. Stacy, is Claire 5 years old? Is she 5? She turned 6 on Tuesday. Claire, that was awesome. Thank you. You made it a wonderful day in our neighborhood. Many times I've wanted to be a good Samaritan, but for one reason or another, I didn't. You've driven by a stranded motorist and thought, I ought to stop, but something pops into our mind like, well, there's been so many cars already by here, surely someone's already stopped. The guy's got to have a cell phone. I mean, who doesn't have a cell phone these days? My grandkids have cell phones. I've been to Haiti and had people in Haiti who don't know where their next meal come from say, can you trade phone numbers with me? They've got cell phones. So this guy, he's going to be okay. Sometimes we go by a situation like that and we think, I'm not sure that it's safe. This guy looks like he may have problems and I don't know what I'm walking into. Better call 911 and let's let the professionals take care of it. Maybe you've been in the same spot like me. Somebody is asking for food, somebody's asking for money, and your compassion side says, yeah, I'm going to do that. But there's another side of you that says, this is who this guy is. I can give him money today, but he's going to be back here tomorrow. Same clothes, same corner, same cough. And we are all wanting to be good Samaritans, but there's a couple of issues that make it tough. Sometimes we're suffering from mild form of donor distress. We've been asked to give so much. We were asked so often. I heard of a church that asked their people to give regularly and generously. Then they added to regularly and generously, won't you buy backpacks? Or won't you buy the 27 things that goes in a backpack? Won't you buy Christmas gifts in September to go around the world sometime before December? Would you give up your Saturday for a go day? Have you ever heard of a church asking so much of people? You probably come here and go, what are they going to ask us to do today? Well, glad you brought that up. The good news is we are going to pack thousands of meals next Saturday. And if you weren't one of the first 165 people to sign up, you don't get to come to the party. Because you were so generous with your time when we sent out the call for people to help pack these thousands of meals. People said yes, 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 yes. And it happens here all the time. You come to the Smart service. Now, we're always trying to get you to come to Saturday night, but here's the good thing about this service. When you come, don't repeat this. We've already had a dress rehearsal. We call it Saturday Night Church. So you get the new and improved edition. So if you think it's bad today, just think of what it was like last night when I gave the message. But oftentimes, you get the privilege of picking up a name of a child that needs a Christmas gift or a backpack. But by the time we get to the third service, you've taken all the names. You've been so generous. But sometimes our desire to be the Good Samaritan starts to wear on us. Nobody can be all in on the church's activity. Nobody can give to everything. Nobody can serve at every opportunity. And I would encourage you to look at what happens here at the chapel like a smorgasbord. It's not intended at a smorgasbord that you take some of everything. Although I kind of like trying it. There's a little competition between me and the restaurant manager. He thinks he's going to get more money out of me than I'm going to get food out of him. And even to the detriment of my own health, I want to win that competition. Think of the chapel, think of most churches like a smorgasbord. You can't serve in every department. You can't go on every missions trip. You can't teach a home Bible study every time we call for somebody to teach a home Bible study. So we get it that we're a smorgasbord. You should take what suits you best and helps you grow, and you should give where it makes an impact for Christ in your life. But nobody can do all this. And to be honest, we do have to factor in the safety concern when we're playing the role of the Good Samaritan. These are not easy decisions. We need to be increasingly cautious and at the same time refusing to be less than generous and compassionate, particularly to our neighbors. Let's refresh our minds with the story of the Good Samaritan. It's found in Luke chapter 10 and verse 25. It reads like this. On one occasion, an expert in the law stood up to test Jesus. Teacher, he asked, what must I do to inherit eternal life? Jesus said, what's written in the law? How do you read it? Now, can I just stop for a moment? This is so like Jesus. Somebody asks him a question, and his frequent response is to turn it back and give them a question. So he says, what must I do to inherit eternal life? And Jesus said, how do you read it? What do you think the Bible says? And if you're trying to share Christ with a friend, that's a brilliant way to keep a discussion going. Instead of when somebody says, why do you believe in God, giving him 47 reasons, give him one and say, but what do you think? Because usually if we can get people to express their thoughts outward, it changes their minds on things that they never thought they would change their mind. So Jesus hits him with a question. He answered, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all of your soul, with all of your strength, and with all of your mind. And love your neighbor as yourself. You have answered correctly, Jesus replied. Do this, and you will live. But he, meaning the lawyer, wanted to justify himself, so he asked Jesus, who is my neighbor? I mean, if it's the person to the right, to the left, in front of me, behind me, is that my neighbor? Do I have to go 2 blocks? Can I limit it to my neighborhood? Can I limit it to the people whose first and last names I know? How far do we have to take this neighbor thing? But he was asking to justify himself because he thought he was going to measure up to Jesus' standards. In reply, Jesus, this is his second tactic. Jesus often answers a question with a question, and many times Jesus answers a question with a story. And this is one of Jesus' most famous stories. It's called the Good Samaritan. Now, it's interesting. This story takes place, and you'll see it when I read it, on a road going from Jerusalem to Jericho. So what's that all about? Well, Jerusalem is the center of worship for the Jewish people. So you were often making a pilgrimage to the holy city, particularly to the temple. And the best way to get there, if you were coming from the north or you were coming from the east, was to come through the city of Jericho and then go up in elevation, a change of 3,400 feet from Jericho, 800 feet below sea level, to Jerusalem, 2,600 feet above sea level. It was an 18-mile rocky, dry, desert, treacherous conditions just for walking. And nobody had Under Armour. Nobody had high-tech hiking boots. You were lucky if you had a stable pair of sandals. And that was just the natural problem. Then there was the human problem. You were walking through rocks and boulders and narrow passages between one cliff and another cliff, and you never know when you came around a rock what was going to be on the other side. It could be somebody with a dagger right at your throat. It was a frequent place for highwaymen to do robbery, burglary, and assault. Dangerous place. So that feeds into the story that Jesus is telling us. He said a man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho when he fell into the hands of robbers. John MacArthur is an excellent Bible teacher. He says that this is a parable. It's a story. Billy Graham said, no, it actually happened. And I know this much. Billy Graham was always right. So they're making this journey, which was a typical journey for people who wanted to go to Jerusalem. When he fell into their hands, they stopped him, stripped him of his clothes, beat him, and went away, leaving him half dead. A priest happened to be going down the same road, and when he saw the man, he passed by on the other side. So the priest is going down this path, and he sees a man over there who's just been beaten and stripped, and so he goes this way. He wants to avoid this situation. He doesn't want to be responsible. He doesn't want to touch somebody. What if the guy's dead? And I touch him, There's Old Testament laws that says you can't enter into a place of worship until you're ceremonially clean from touching a dead person. Who knows? He may be a Gentile, and we won't touch a Gentile. So the priest does the avoidance tactic. Have you ever saw somebody you didn't want to talk to at the other end of the grocery aisle, and so you swerved and went down 3 aisles and dodged? It's not that you're mean. It's just going, oh, this guy's a talker. He stands up every Sunday. He goes on and on and on. You see him on Monday, he's got another story to tell you. You know, what's really fun is saying hi to people that you know, but you've got a baseball cap on and a mask, and they're going, you're way too friendly. What's this about? This was all the type of thinking that we go through. That's what went through this priest's head. So he passes by on the other side. So too a Levite. What's a Levite? Primarily it's a priest's assistant. They were one of the tribes, and they were to care for the physical operations of the tabernacle and then the temple. And he did the same thing. He passed by on the other side. Now look at the beginning of verse 33. It begins with the contrasting conjunction, but. In contrast to the priest, in contrast to the Levite, but a Samaritan, as he traveled, came where the man was, and when he saw him, he took pity on him. Now, this story would be offensive to this lawyer asking the question, because the lawyer is not expecting the Samaritan to be the good guy in the story. Just the briefest history lesson. There was a civil war in Israel. It was north versus south. Jeroboam and Rehoboam, 2 sons of Solomon, divided the nation in half and then went to war with each other. They were brothers, they were fellow countrymen, they were fellow Jewish, and they hated each other, and they tried to kill each other. They took sides with their mutual enemies against one another. They didn't help each other. When the Assyrians held the north captive, the south didn't come to their aid. When the Egyptians came up from the south, the north didn't come to the aid of the south. They even built, the Samaritans even built their own temple and their alternative place of worship. It was in a place called Mount Gerizim. So it got to the point where if you were a Jew living in the north and you needed to get to the south, which was usually several times a year because you wanted to go to Jerusalem, but you didn't want to go through Samaria, which is in the middle. So what you did is you walked around Samaria. It would be like this, saying, you need to go from Fort Wayne to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Just think for a moment. How would you get from Fort Wayne to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania? You'd go east through what state? Ohio. That's right. And anybody who has any sense of class and dignity would do everything possible not to go through Ohio. Now, if you're new here and you don't know, what is this all about? I'm from Ohio. I never cared much about Big Ten sports till I moved here. I met IU fans, Purdue fans, Notre Dame fans, and they said, where are you from? And I said, Ohio. They said, oh, you probably like the Buckeyes. And I said, I do now. So you're not going to drive through Ohio to put up with people like me. Could you imagine what an inconvenience it would be in your air-conditioned car to have to drive all the way down to Kentucky, cross over to Kentucky into West Virginia, and enter Pennsylvania from West Virginia because you didn't want to go through Ohio? But you can't compare it because you're driving a car. You've got air conditioning and climate control, and you're going to make pit stops at nice McDonald's, and you're going to have new food along the way, and you've got a CD or technology that you can listen to your favorite podcasts. It's just part of the ride. This was guys going through treacherous, difficult situations. So here's the point. The lawyer expected the story to go like this. 2 Samaritans passed by on the other side, but a Jewish rabbi saw it and came to the aid. That's what they expected the story to be. And Jesus flips on them, and the Samaritan's the good guy in the story. They would have thought the perpetrator would have been the Samaritan. The Samaritan had pity on him. He went to him. He bandaged his wounds, pouring on oil and wine. Then he put the man on his own donkey, took him to an inn, and took care of him. The next day, he took out 2 silver coins and gave them to the innkeeper. Look after him, he said, and when I return, I will reimburse you for any extra expense you may have. Which of these 3 do you think was a neighbor to the man who fell into the hands of the robbers? The expert on the law required the one who had mercy on him. Can you imagine how hard that was for this lawyer to say, my countrymen weren't the good guy, my enemy was the good guy? Jesus told him, go and do likewise. So the title of our message today is, if I'm going to be a good neighbor, what's it going to cost me? So let's start off by getting some more background. What did it cost the Good Samaritan to be the Good Samaritan? I mean, he would have gone home with more money in his pocket if he would have done the thing that the priest and the Levite did, and that is just pass by. Don't notice, don't look, eyes forward. You'll be past him in 10 minutes. You won't remember this tomorrow. But he didn't. He paid a price. First of all, he paid a financial price, a financial cost. And I think the cost was about $500. Now, when I came to that conclusion, and I'll show you how I got to that conclusion in a moment, but when I came to that conclusion, I went, uh-oh. All of my life, I thought the man was generous, but I never dreamed it was $500 worth of generous. I thought it was $25 worth of generous, maybe $50 worth of generous. I mean, now you're saying, well, how did you get to 500? Well, we're told that the Samaritan gave the innkeeper 2 denarii. Singular, it's called a denarius. And a denarius is what a person made for 1 day's wages. If you worked for a day, you were going to get 1 denarius. So then I asked the question, what's a day's wage in Allen County? And I went to a website. It was called Indiana Stats Indiana, actually. And it spelled out Allen County, the average median, I'm not sure whether it's average or median. I think it was the median income for Allen County was $55,000. Then I did some of Rick's math. It may not work out, but I assumed that this was based on people working 5 days a week, not 7 days a week. I assumed that they got 2 weeks vacation. I assumed that they got maybe as many as 10 sick days, personal days. So that gave me a denominator, and I divided the 55,750 by the number of days they worked and came up with $232 is the day's wages today in our county. So if the guy gave 2 denarii, that's $464 for hotel, probably hotel and a meal a day. And by hotel, we call it an inn. It's more like a bed and breakfast, minus the bed and the breakfast. I mean, these were primitive times, and he's forked over out of pocket $464. Add to that the incidentals, bandaging, oil, wine, and then a promise to give more money on a return trip if more was needed. That's a level of generosity that shocks me. I don't think of being a good Samaritan having the entry fee, the initiation rights at $500. That's pretty amazing. The man really did have pity on the one who was beaten and robbed. But there's a greater cost than money. There's also the cost of time. And time may be more valuable than money. At least it is much of the time, to be redundant. In our life, we trade time for money, and then we turn around and trade money for time. Let me explain. You trade time for money. It's called a job. You go to work, and you put in your time. You do your job well. They pay you money for the time that you gave. Make sense? So now you've gave all this time, and you've got money. You're over here, you've got money, but you're going, man, I don't have time to do all the extra things that I really want to do with life. So how can I get some time back? We give money to get time. We pay somebody else to mow our grass. We pay somebody else to do our laundry. We pay somebody else to paint our house. We pay somebody else to do tasks that we maybe could do ourselves, but we don't want to spend the time. So we give back money in order to buy time. We live in a society where we are always under a time crunch. How many of you have said sometime in the last week, I'm too busy? Those of you who didn't raise your hand, could you come down here right after church? I've got a few things we'd like to ask you to do. I mean, when you ask somebody to do something and they're not just blowing you off, the most frequent response we get here at the chapel is, I'd love to do that, I just don't have time. And we agree, you probably don't have time. In the equation of trading time for money and money for time, it gets very difficult. Here's a fascinating study that was done back in the 70s at Princeton Seminary. Princeton College, Princeton University started off as a seminary. And if you're new to church and stuff like that, a seminary is where pastors go to study theology. It sounds a lot like a cemetery, and by the way some of us speak, it probably has that effect from time to time. But a seminary is where clergy, how do you like that one? Clergy are trained. So Princeton Seminary did an experiment on some unexpected students. They were taking a class probably called homiletics, which is a class that trains people how to give a public speech and teach the Bible. So these students were told, they don't know the real story, but the story they were told is, we are going to videotape you giving a sermon on the Good Samaritan. So meet us in the classroom, we'll work on our messages, and then we'll go over to the studio where they'll videotape your message. So these students come in, they work on their message, they're in the class, and then they're sent off one at a time with 3 different instructions. A group of them, not traveling together, but a group of them were given what we call the hurry condition. They were told, hurry up, you've got to get across campus, we're already late, they're waiting for you, so get there as quickly as you can, and they gave them a map of how to get there. The second group were launched, and they were the intermediate worry and hurry. They were told, you've got time to get there, but they'll be ready for you, so head right over now if you would. And then the third group was the low hurry. The low hurry were told, you can go over now, they're not quite ready for you, but I don't think you have to wait very long. Well, what they didn't know is there was a student or faculty member pretending to be a man in distress and in trouble on the side of the road. So the question now is, how many seminary students are going to practice what they're about to preach? And they don't know it. So they're walking by, looking at their map. Their map takes them down a fairly narrow alley, and there's a man in the alley, obviously in trouble. He's coughing, he can't get up, and they have to decide, what am I going to do? Here are the results. In the high hurry, that first group that was told, get moving, 10% in the high hurry group stopped to help. I want you to know if you're a part of that 10%, you just passed a big exam with an A+. But 9 out of 10 did what the priest did what the Levite did, and they walked around. They avoided. They somehow weren't able to see the need to stop. In the intermediate hurry, 45%, almost half of them stopped. And in the low hurry, the people who were told, they're not even ready for you yet, but go on over, it won't take long. A whopping 63% in the low hurry group stopped to help. So the experts made the following conclusions. Conclusion number 1, thinking about the Good Samaritan did not increase helping behavior. In other words, just because we talked about the Good Samaritan today, it's not going to change your mind or my mind to be more willing to be a helper. But being in a hurry decreased the helping behavior. In other words, a good sermon ain't worth much. You heard it here, folks. So if a person is experiencing, I know this message, I know this story about Jesus, I know what Jesus would do. We all wear these bracelets. What would Jesus do? We know what Jesus would do, but I'm in a hurry. I'm in a hurry. That kicks in And literally, we go through some physiological body changes when we're in a hurry. It's really just another part of the same matrix of our fight or flight. When we're in a hurry, we become focused exclusively on our goal, and it shuts out what's in the periphery, what's on the horizon. What else should we be seeing? What should we be taking notice of? Because we're driven to be in a hurry. Second, failure to help is probably not due to indifference or self-centeredness. In other words, these weren't bad men. These weren't people who didn't care. These weren't people who say, they're not worth my time. None of that's happening. The dominant cause is time pressure. Number 4, most of the students who believed they had enough time to stop did so. So take heart in humanity in general and clergymen in particular. Given the right circumstances, they're like you. They'll probably come around and do the right thing. We all suffer from this intense belief that we don't have enough time. And we have exaggerated in our culture the importance of being on time. Part of that is because we try to cram so much into our life. If you've ever been to the islands, particularly Jamaica or Haiti, you'll hear this expression, soon come. Can I tell you what soon come means? It has nothing to do with the word soon. It's not going to happen immediately. It means in its time. Don't be in a hurry. Don't rush. You're saying, well, I don't like their economy. Well, there's some trade-offs, aren't there? We can be obsessively driven and do more, or we can be compassionate and slow down to care for others. It's a tough call. So let's start off with some small steps to get us started. How do we become the Good Samaritan? I'm going to give you 3 things, and they really dovetail together. The first is to widen our margins. I love that expression, to widen our margins. It comes from an Old Testament passage, Leviticus chapter 19, verse 9. It's all about reaping and gleaning. Let me explain. Everybody was in the agribusiness at the time of this story. No one sold tires, no one sold automobiles. Every family was at least in part a subsistence farmer. And you found your ground, you planted your grain grew by God's grace, you got enough water, and it's now time to go harvest your grain. Here's what Leviticus says. When you harvest your grain, the first thing you're to do is you're to harvest all of it except for along the edge of your property. So this little drawing, the brown is what's been harvested, the gold is the wheat that is still standing, and you're to leave a margin. Why do you leave a margin? That now is available to someone who is poor. They can come, they're allowed to take some of it. It's for somebody who's traveling and there's not a McDonald's on the horizon, and so the person who's traveling can come and pick that up. So you're to leave a margin. You're also to leave whatever you drop, leave it. Again, that's for the poor to come and pick it up, and you're not allowed to go through a second time. But the key here is to widen our margins. Number 2 is scheduling our time. Most of us don't have time because we found something fun, something meaningful, something good to do, and we've packed it into our schedule. And then something even more fun, even more meaningful, even more helpful came along, and so we added that to the schedule. And so we've just packed our life with fullness and busyness, and we don't have the time to help be a good neighbor. We don't even have time to know who our neighbors are. So let me tell you a Hawks family story. One night, our house caught on fire. I was home, the dog was home, Becca was home. I forget where Rachel was. I think she was married at the time. She was home, but not at our home. And so I come up the stairs. Becca's on the top floor. I've been in the basement. I come to the middle floor. It's on fire. And I go to get to the phone. The fire is between me and the phone. My cell phone, the fire is between me and the cell phone. I get Becca out, and I run over to our neighbors, great neighbors, and I pound on their door. They're not home. So I go to the other side of my house, to Marvin Bunny's. I pound on their door. Thank God they were home, because I just ran out of neighbors whose names I knew. That's pretty sad commentary. I only know people. And I'm great at excuses. I'm one of the best at excuses. I say, we have a long driveway. I think our driveway is over 100 feet long. And when you get to the top, you turn right into the garage. So you don't see people. All you see is your garage. And we've got these buttons. Garage door goes up. Hit the button, garage door goes down. We don't even see each other. So being part of a good neighbor, saying, I'm going to widen my margins. I'm going to get to know my neighbors. I'm going to care before they need me, or more importantly, before I need them. I shouldn't say more importantly. So we build into our schedule some downtime, some discretionary time. We don't make commitments on top of commitments, even though they may be good things that literally put us into the category of hurry, scurry, and worry. Number 3, allocating our finances. Allocating our finances. There's a whole lot I'd like to say about allocating our finances, but just let me say, don't spend every dollar you have. And don't go in debt for anything that doesn't increase its value over time. So if you've got an investment that appreciates your house, to borrow money for a house makes sense. If you don't have money for a car, it's going to depreciate. That's not the smartest move you can make. But really what we would coach you on today is this. Consumerism. We are under so much pressure through commercials, through television, through internet. Every time I open up my internet, ad pops up after ad pops up. And they know who I am. They know what I like. They put the ads that are going to appeal to me. And I want more, and you want more. And as the book of Proverbs says, the leeches have 2 children that say, more, more. We're not happy with what we have, but we're convinced that a little bit more would make us happy. And so we need to say, living within my means and having something left to be generous with others is a high, high value. Work that into the allocation of your finances. My grandfather was a pretty simple man. They fled Pennsylvania and moved to Akron, Ohio, when Akron, Ohio was a booming town where most of the tires in the world were made in Akron. And if you made it to Akron, you made it to a job. You didn't make a lot of money in those early days. My grandfather was raising his family during the Great Depression. But he would say to me, much after that time, always pay yourself first. I didn't know what that meant, pay yourself first. And then he explained to me, in the Great Depression, when we didn't have enough money, we saved a nickel every week. Can you imagine being so poor that a nickel mattered? He said, we saved a nickel every week. My grandfather died reasonably wealthy. Not fabulously wealthy, but reasonably wealthy, because he didn't spend it all. There's many of us who will spend all that we have and more to our detriment. But worse than that, not just to our detriment, but to the society in which we live, to the children who we are raising. They need to see us live a life of generosity, spending it not just on them and ourselves, but being a good neighbor. Make sense? Wouldn't you be my neighbor? It's a wonderful day in the neighborhood. If you'll stand, I'll give the benediction. God, we want to be for our neighbors because we know that you were for our neighbors before they were our neighbors. And you care about them not because they're our neighbors, but because they are your children. And you've told us to love our neighbors. Lord, I'm convinced and I'm convicted that that includes the people most unlike me as much as being a neighbor to those who are most like me. Change our hearts. In Jesus' name, amen. Good morning, and go change the world.